Welcome to Gemcast Live. Today we have a special treat. We have Artiranth, whose story has already been published, being read by her husband. It is going to be amazing. And so, without further ado, here is the writer herself.
My name is Artie. I am a new author. The first book that I published came out last year. It's called Reasons Found in Promises, and it is an urban fantasy monster romance, which follows Zoe and Ronan as they meet, and all kinds of shenanigans happen. We don't really need much of a lead in after that because we're going to be starting with the prologue and the first chapter. So I hope you guys enjoy. And here I am passing it over to my husband, who is being so ever kind doing the reading as my number one fan. So hope y'all enjoy. Thank you.
All right, hi everybody. I'm going to be reading Reasons Found in Promises, the prologue, and chapter 1. All right. Prologue. You promised, Vincent. A quiet, gentle-faced woman accused her husband on a pleasant, albeit slightly chilly, fall evening. They sat out on the back deck of their modest house, with an old table between them and a small lamp for light. You promised you would tell me what happened. I know, it's just... The man let out a dejected sigh. It's hard to relive. They have fought about this dozens of times throughout the last 20 years. Once in a while, Vincent would turn his head and stare out into the eerie mist mountain pass and get lost in his own thoughts. His eyes glazed over with the hauntings of something he never quite told the full story of. But you are reliving it, over and over again, every time you look that way. Marie stood up abruptly, making the entire deck shake as the chair was pushed roughly behind her, and pointed towards the woods, her voice rising to an exasperated shrill, filled with years of watching her husband torture himself. Maybe if he would just tell me, you can let it go. You won't believe me, Vincent asserted, looking down at his glass. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean I can't listen. I'm not insane. I never said you are. Tears began pooling in her eyes, and that is ultimately what broke Vincent down. Of all things, he hated it when his wife cried. Marie. He let her name tumble out of his lips like a man praying for water in a desert. All right. The woman who was now halfway to leaving turned back with a jolt. I'll tell you. I'll tell you what happened that night. Vincent swallowed thickly, his voice still wavering as much as his resolve. But he couldn't bear to see his wife cry over this one more time. Marie pulled her chair up to the table, fixing her skirts delicately as she sat back down to listen to her husband's story, the whole time moving like she was trying not to startle a cornered animal. How much do you know about what I did after college? He asked, which was definitely not a question that Marie was expecting. Tidbits, she admitted. Mostly things your parents let slip. Doesn't seem to be a part of history any of you like to revisit. For good reason. Vincent chuckled, placing his glass on the table and staring at it as if it would somehow shine a light on what was about to reveal. I ended up hanging out with the local myth hunters club, the one that tried to convince the college principal to fund a search for Bigfoot. Really? The woman looked at him skeptically, her curly blonde hair bouncing to match the quirk of her brow. Yep, that's the one. Vincent coughed out a melancholic laugh. Despite what the football jock said, many of them were actually quite fun guys. And no, they were not on any illicit substances. Oh, come on. You're really telling me they weren't huffing some Me Jane? She guffawed, waving her arm dismissively. One of them tried to convince the class he saw a deer twice my height. Not a deer, an elk. And he did, the man said, his tone grave as he refused to take his eyes off the glass. I did too. You are saying that was real? Marie folded both palms in her lap, concern warring with disbelief in her mind. Yeah, more than real. It was the thing that got them in the end. What do you mean, got them? Killed them, massacred them. Marie, Vincent's voice began rising to a shrill, but noticing his wife shift uncomfortably in her chair, he took a deep breath, steadying himself just enough to continue in a low, strained tone. That night, we went into the woods. We had evidence, footage, things you won't believe. It was like a village of those things, a whole society, different from ours. They were human, but not. We had notes and pictures and drawings that we had been gathering for months. We were going to present it to the school board. We thought we were going to be famous. They were beautiful, like angels incarnate. I wish I could show you, but we got careless, stayed out too late. Next thing we knew, this other creature came out of nowhere. It was huge, 9, 10 feet tall, I think. Its eyes glowed gold, and it had these elk antlers and claws, sharp black claws. Vincent shivered at the memory, gripping his glass worrisomely tight. At first, it just asked us what we were doing. One of those excitable fellows started telling it about all the stuff we had and how we wanted to research them, and it ripped out his throat. But it was a crazy man. There was a trial. The guy got convicted. That is not possible. He finished for his wife. He didn't do it, Murray. Someone had to get pinned for all those deaths, and he took the fall. But it wasn't him. I saw it. I watched as this thing turned over a dozen feet tall and began killing everyone around me, ripping their entrails out of their bellies and throwing them into the trees. I hid underneath Nathan's body, which had his ribs cracked open like a goddamn chestnut. I hid, and I watched. And when it was over, I ran. The screams, Murray. The screams. Vincent's eyes glistened until he blinked, and the tears spilled over, falling soundlessly onto his shirt, creating wet droplet marks. Marie placed a hand over his, which was still holding the glass, but now limp, as though it had lost the will to hold on. The same person it was attached to. You couldn't have known, she murmured in a soothing voice, stomping down her disbelief for the sake of her husband. But I did, the man whimpered. I did. I found them the week before. The other things, another village. They were strange and looked like all sorts of different creatures. I found one of them, a small one. She looked kind of half horse. I'm not sure. She was slimy and had green hair. I managed to restrain her near a river, and I brought her over. I think that creature came for her. The sobbing mess of a man tried to get himself together, but it was to no avail. His breathing only became more ragged, and his wails more agonized. It was my fault, he yelled. It was my fault they died. Marie practically fell off her chair to lean in front of her husband, taking both of his hands into her own. It's not. You didn't kill them. You didn't. The creature did. You believe me? Vincent looked up, his eyes wide, tears still falling from them. I don't know, Marie confessed, and Vincent visibly sagged like a wet paper bag. But I do know that you did not kill them. Whoever or whatever it was did. It's not fair. The man shook his head. I led the thing there, and I lived, but they all died. You survived because you were smart, honey. Marie grasped her husband's hands firmly, twisting the ring on his left finger. You outsmarted that thing and survived. You are a survivor. I am a survivor. Say it with me. Their eyes locked together, one set earnest, the other tear-stricken and in pain. I am a, they said in unison, taking deep breaths after each word, survivor. The world went silent except for the crickets out in the field behind their house. Marie's face became illuminated by starlight as a passing cloud opened up the sky, and her reassuring smile lit up Vincent's world all over again. I am a survivor, he repeated. The thought settled in his chest like a well-earned drink. Yes. Now how do you feel? Marie asked, rubbing her thumbs against the back of his hands. I feel better. Vincent looked like the words in his mouth was forming surprised him, but then it fell into a relieved smile. I feel good. Thank you, Marie, for listening. Of course, isn't that what a wife is for? She cooed up, standing up carefully. Oh, they'll remind me not to sit like that. Breaks the back. I know of a good way to break your back. The man wiggled his eyebrows suggestively, a spark back in his eyes that hadn't been seen there in years. Marie giggled, smacking him on the shoulder. Oh, stop it, you scoundrel. Immediately undercutting her protests with a let me get you another drink, and then we can take this upstairs. Our son is out for the evening, so we have all night. Mm. Well, don't make me wait too long, Vincent teased, letting Marie slide her hands out of his. Never, honey. Vincent watched as his wife suggestively sashayed into the house. He hasn't been paying attention to her as much as he should have. Better late than never, a wise man once said. Vincent glanced out into the wilderness once more, but it didn't capture him the same. With another relieved sigh, his gaze fell on the table where his drink still stood, halfway finished. Since his wife was bringing another, probably as a cover to go put on something skimpy and lacy, he might as well finish it. He brought it up to his nose, really taking on the savory smell of vermouth for the first time since he barely remembered when. Marie was right. Talking about it did help. Though it didn't make the pain and memories disappear, it changed his view of them. Now, instead of the guilt and fear, he thought that it might be over. He still missed his friends, but he had a family now, a different life. Perhaps it was okay to move on, to let them live on in spirit, but to let the self-torment end, let another long journey to truly believing that it's over begin. Yeah, it was, he decided. From the darkness of night came a thin, clawed hand with sharp, shining talons that clawed around the man's neck. The next moment, his throat was wide open to the starry sky, and the glass tumbled out of his hand, rolling until it got lodged between the wooden planks of the deck. The blood reflected with a wet sheen as it traveled to his shoulder and down his arm, all the way to the fingertips, where it dripped down into a scarlet pool. Chapter 1. Go get help, they said. It will be a good break for you, they said. It'll be full of experts who can help you, they said. As far as Zoe was concerned, they could go to the fuck to hell. They all meant well, supposedly. But how are a bunch of people who don't have problems supposed to know what a mental health facility for people who do have problems is actually like? The answer is, they do not. The they, in this case, being various friends and family, though Zoe was unsure if she would call most of them at this point. If the shit show that was her reason for being here was anything to go by, none of them actually gave a flying fuck about her, or anyone but themselves, for that matter. Well, minus Cassie. But it is always minus Cassie. She's an angel, however, that is beside the point. The point is, Zoe had a lot of regrets in her life. But opening up during the assessment when she first got to the Hallowcrest psychiatric facility was by far the biggest. That was 2 months ago, and this place was positively awful. The only thing it proved is nobody actually cared or paid attention to anything. Take, for example, the ward nurse who just walked by one of her own patients, fidgeting with a paper napkin and eating it instead of the food. Another resident was having a social anxiety attack, resulting in them trying to leave the cafeteria without eating, and the nurses not letting them. Or the guard, who literally turned his head away from one of the more unruly patients, nicknamed Crazy Bob, getting belligerent with Zoe. Back in my day, women didn't get depressed. They would serve their husbands like good housewives and not complain. He yelled, spewing spit across the dinky plastic table, making it shake as he slammed his fist down repeatedly. Zoe heaved an enormous sigh, picked up her tray of dubious food, and walked away. Much to the protests of the man who was now calling her a rude, disrespectful harlot that doesn't know her place. The guard still did nothing, determined to at least have her a somewhat suspicious-looking green beans and peas. She searched for the emptiest table she could find, eventually spotting one in the very back that appeared completely abandoned, until she walked right up to it and saw that there was, in fact, an occupant sitting right next to the wall. A man who simultaneously appeared as if he'd lived for a century and as if he was not a day over 30. His flat brown hair hung in a curtain down to his shoulders, much of it pinned back in a half-up ponytail. His stubble was carefully groomed, but expression bland and unreadable as he moved his food around on the tray with a plastic fork, like he was trying to pick out the least offensive pieces. Surprisingly, he wore black nail polish, which indicated he had been here long enough to earn the privilege. A singular guard stood behind them at a 90-degree angle, looking more like a young, blonde, blue-eyed pool boy than a protector, glancing at him intermittently. Despite the slightly odd picture, this was the least populated table. To sweeten the pot, the tables next to this one also sparse with people, and those who were there sat quietly. Excuse me, Zoe called out, and the man's gaze shut up from his tray, locking with hers. His brilliant hazel eyes that were almost gold burrowed into her. A micro expression of surprise widened his irises before they became neutral once more. May I sit down? Zoe gestured to the seat on the very opposite corner of the man's with her tray. I won't bother you, she added hastily when the man didn't move, her voice unintentionally tinged with a tired exasperation. Just want to eat in peace. For a moment, she thought he was going to refuse, or just go back to eating his food like she wasn't even there. Actually, expected would be the more appropriate word, as that is the behavior of others she has become accustomed to. But the man nodded, jerking his chin at the chair as if to say, Stay over there, though. That was just fine by Zoe, and she gingerly sat down for her own meal, placing her tray in front of her and grabbing the small styrofoam sauce cup. As soon as she popped the lid open, she grimaced and put it back on, setting it off to the side. She didn't even want to know what it was because it smelled so rancid. As a result, she caught those piercing eyes watching her from underneath a few flyaway strands of hair. The man quickly looked down, returning to his slow chewing. Now that she had analyzed him more closely, one could not be more disgusted with that was in their mouth while still eating it. Even his fingers seemed to twitch every time he took a bite, like it was taking effort not to cover his mouth. He was rather gaunt, giving the impression he was eating, but not quite enough to keep a healthy weight, or rather missing something from his overall diet. Zoe shook the thought away and hastily stabbed a bean on her fork, unsuccessfully, as it instead got lodged between the prongs that bent around it, and shoved it in her mouth. She always had this habit of watching people, noting things that were not entirely her business whatsoever. Commenting on those got in her mouth trouble enough for her to learn to keep her mouth shut, despite knowing better, though she couldn't help but play the strange game of glance tag. The two barely missed each other's gaze 3 whole times before Zoe braved the rice look-alike on the bottom right of her tray. Bleh. She stuck out her tongue reflexively. Tasting like cardboard was one thing, but feeling like it was covered in the slime was another. Bad, isn't it? The man asked, his voice rich and low, reminding one of a crackling campfire. He placed his forearms on either side of his plate and was watching her intently, now wearing an almost amused grin as he observed Zoe's struggle. To put it mildly, Zoe confirmed, flicking the bit of whatever that is back down and wiping the fork on the side just to get the rest off. One would think there is a point at which just serving actual rice would be cheaper. The man scoffed. That would require sense. The world's low on that, she grumbled, bobbing her head to the side. Abysmally, he agreed, abruptly standing up while pushing his chair back with one foot. The guard startled, reaching for his shoulder, but the man raised a palm up in the air. I'm finished. The guard stopped, but appeared to be decidedly unconvinced. There was an uncertain moment in which the possibility of the man being apprehended was just as probable as nothing happening at all. Luckily, the latter won out, and the guard stepped back. The strange man exhaled in relief, his shoulders falling as he picked up his tray and started making his way around the table. As he walked past Zoe, he took a small plastic container of what looked like pasta salad off his plate and put it in front of her. His long fingers still wrapped around it. Here. I, Zoe peeped at him, but meeting the intensity of those eyes, she promptly locked hers on the container to avoid it. Standing, the man was surprisingly tall, making his already loose shirt look even less fitting. Finally, she managed to get out. You look like you need to eat too. His eyes grew wide, and Zoe mentally kicked herself. Seriously? He probably didn't want it to be pointed out that he was obviously malnourished. That wouldn't make anyone feel good. But he just snorted, then said in a stern voice that broached no argument, "Celiac disease. They always forget." Oh, Zoe exhaled, her gaze following his arm back up to his face. Thank you. Ronan, he supplied, pushing the container closer to her. Thank you, Ronan, she repeated, the name tumbling out of her lips with a strange reverence. I'm Zoe. Ronan's fingers visibly tightened on the container, squishing it, and making the plastic creak weakly before he let go of it entirely. Good to meet you, Zoe. He pushed out before turning himself away from the table with a jolt. She watched him leave, having to twist in her seat to follow Ronan as he threw out the rest of the food on his plate and exited the cafeteria, closely followed by the blonde guard, notably turning left towards the stairs and not right towards where the general rooms were. Only once he was completely out of sight did Zoe turn back to the face of the container he left. With a resigned sigh, she pried it open and tried a piece. Surprisingly, the contents were actually relatively tolerable. Not wanting to waste Ronan's kindness, she ate the whole thing clean before going back to her own room, deciding to play hooky on this evening's group activities. The last thing she wanted was interacting with Bob again. Never mind the doc in charge of those. He was a mean old geezer. Not eager to deliberate on the details of her insignificant existence, Zoe laid down on the twin-size bed, stomach first. Fully intended to make a nice long nap, hopefully forever, but most likely only until the next morning. That was the plan, at least, until there was a forceful knock at her door. Miss Mavis, please open the door. You are late for the evening activities. It was the voice of her assigned psychiatrist, Thomas Ashford, easily recognizable by the British accent. Well, he preferred to be called a psychologist, and technically was highly qualified as both, but since he liked one, Zoe pointedly called him the other, because he was just as trustworthy as the rest of them as far as Zoe was concerned. Even if he was a little nicer, which is to say, not at all. Why? She countered, raising her head just enough to have her voice audible on the other side of the door. Why what? Why should I go? When no answer came, she continued, to get bothered by a sexist old man, get my ears screamed into, and be forced to tolerate Dr. Hawthorne being a condescending prick? No thank you. She buried her face back in her pillow, which was more of a glorified foam block. Miss Mavis, open up, please. Dr. Ashford repeated, his voice remaining steady despite the undeniable frustration at the situation. Zoe ignored him, instead of muffling a groan in the bedding. Zoe, the psychiatrist switched tactics. Open or I'll have to write you up. That practically gave her no choice, as write-ups could mean the loss of privileges or more surveillance. As if the current conditions were not bad enough. So Zoe got up, stomping over to the door and opening it. When she swung it outwards, she saw Dr. Ashford with a set of keys at the ready. He was an average height man with dark hair and a pleasant enough face and chocolate brown eyes. More often than not, he wore bright-colored shirts, a yellow one today, like he was about to go to a golf course rather than an office. A saint necklace dangling around his neck and a black wedding band with a silvery inlay out against his pale complexion. "Thank you for not making me use these," he said, jingling the keys. "Resorting to threats isn't a good look, Doc," Zoe accused, folding her arms in front of her. "I wouldn't have to if you showed up at activities." "I am depressed, not socially inept. Those activities are more stress than they are worth." Dr. Ashford gave her a skeptical glare. "According to my observations, you appear to be both. As you have avoided almost every social activity and haven't made any connections with either patients or staff since being here, it is expected for most people to reach out to at least somebody in the span of 2 months." "Okay, first, that's creepy, Doc," Zoe pointed out, making him briefly grimace at the inability to deny the allegation. "Second, I talked to someone just today." "Oh?" He narrowed his eyes. "And who is that?" "It was a guy. A long-term resident, I think. So I doubt you know him." As far as Zoe knew, Dr. Ashford was mostly assigned to newer residents. Despite her being pretty sure of the fact, the psychiatrist asked again, his voice low and wary. "What was his name?" "Ronan." With much more haste than seemed reasonable, Dr. Ashford said, You should stay away from him." "Why?" she probed, leaning on the door frame, now only intrigued. "I," the doctor tripped over his words, "I am not at liberty to disclose that." "Uh-huh," Zoe nodded, glancing at the doctor up and down. He had become strangely stiff, as if caught in his incompetence. His gaze bounced from side to side as he avoided actually meeting her gaze. "Look, I'll give you a pass for this evening's social activities, if you have individual sessions with me instead," he offered, putting keys he had been awkwardly holding up in the air this whole time back into his pocket. Frankly, that seemed like a pretty good deal, since an individual session also counted as an evening activity even if nobody said anything. "Works for me. We can start tomorrow." Zoe shrugged and closed the door, leaving Ashford to exhale in exasperation. Once the sound of the psychiatrist walking away faded into silence, Zoe returned to the bed. She flopped onto the stiff mattress, blissfully unaware that she was on someone else's mind tonight. While she fell asleep instantly, on the opposite side of the building and 2 floors up, Ronan lay wide awake on the bed that barely fit his tall frame. Resting his head on it, his arms folded below it, he stared up at the popcorn ceiling, trying to imagine it was the night sky he missed so much. Instead, his mind kept wandering to the girl he met today, wondering what possessed him to even let her sit there, never mind talk to her. In his mind's eye, he saw Zoe as if she were right there in front of him. Every feature burned into his retinas. Light gray hair with jet black at the roots framed a round face with gentle features. She must have been in the facility for long enough for her hair to grow out a bit after she dyed it. The thought of her build, shorter than average, but with plump, soft curves, made his fingers itch with the want to hold and squeeze. Ronan tried to force the image away, putting a palm over his face. It didn't do him any good, as instead their conversation, and especially her voice, started echoing in his ears. He hasn't talked to anyone but the guards and social workers since he first got here. Found it was better that way, simpler. However, when he gazed at Zoe, the usual stone wall he felt between himself and other humans flaked just a tad. All Ronan wanted was to make sure she ate. Some small, atrophied part of him knew it came from a much deeper place than that. But his forcefully pragmatic side buried it until the feeling was nothing more than a fleeting impulse, one he intended not to act upon again. Ronan turned on his side, pulling up the pillow into his chest as he tried to make it make his lanky body fit into a tight ball around it. Sleep didn't come easy, not that it ever did since he was committed. But this time, when he closed his eyes, he saw the night sky and Zoe's dark eyes. That concludes chapter 1 and the prologue.
Wow, really nicely written. That was
Thank you.
enjoyable. I like your transitions. Like you close the prologue, but also when you in chapter one, when you move from one character to the other, and also when you close that chapter, it's like it sounds professional. Like you know how to move, because like like I started out in Royal Road, and I write third omniscient, but I'm still feeling like the readers nowadays they're very like they're easy to jump if a POV transition is the least bit irritable to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a very conscious consideration when I decided to write this kind of omniscient, or some people call it roaming third perspective, as it's meant to kind of mimic Agatha Christie novels. If you've ever read those, she writes a lot in this closed limited roaming third, right, where you stick close to characters but you move between them freely. And I know how grating it is. You're absolutely right. So I tried to be especially conscious of it, to make sure that it will kind of make it as seamless for the reader as possible. So yeah, it's definitely something I tried to pay attention to as I wrote this. I'm glad that that paid off. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Lucia said something I agree with as well, that that the dialogue was amazing. Yeah, I thought that you really did a good job of showing the personalities, and it sounded like just very believable.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of time spent refining, the character voices and their perspectives and stuff like that for that. So thank you. Means a lot.
Ira had a question about the prologue. She asked, "Is the girl in the prologue based on the Kelpie?"
I will refrain from answering because that would be spoilers. That's all I will say. That prologue has a lot of weight for the rest of the story, and all I will say is definitely keep the details in mind if you do decide to pick up the rest of the book. So.
Yeah, that it very much gave the vibe of two very different environments. Like when he read the prologue and then he read chapter one, it was like, wow, this is like a completely different feel. Like I think that you did a good job of that too.
Thank you. Yeah, there was the idea of, right, the ending note of prologue to chapter one being this kind of very jarring, uh, jump. I was done so that we kind of really hammered down on Zoe and her uh, worldview, right? So I that that transition was kind of on purpose, to kind of give it a little more oomph. So glad that that also worked out.
You said it was a monster romance, an
Mhm.
urban monster romance. What inspired you to write the story? Where'd you get your ideas from?
Well, I started writing with fan fiction, right? Has Been Hotel. So I kind of was already in the romance monster kind of genre. But I've also always been fascinated by crime and mystery novels and stuff like that. So um and on top of that, the last part of that is I've always had a soft spot for these stories of, well, it could be real, right? If you suspend your disbelief a little bit and, well, what if, right? Like Harry Potter, for example, obviously a very common, right? I'm sure anybody in that who read it at that age was waiting for their Hogwarts letter at 11 years old, right? Because they're still set in this world, right? This idea of it's still here, it's among us, right? And that has always appealed to me over high fantasy. Not that I don't absolutely love a lot of high fantasy books, but I've always had a little bit of a special place in my heart for it. And another thing is that I find that a lot of monster romances, especially the popular ones are often treated a little bit like crack ships in fan fiction, right? They're fast and potato chippy and silly, and I love them for it, right? I've read so many, and probably more of those than I've read anything else, honestly. But I really wanted something that was more grounded, was slower, and really asked to hold a narrative thread in the way that some of the older fantasy, mystery, and romance books did. Take that old like Pride and Prejudice and all of those staples, right, and put those into the monster romance genre. And so all of that kind of culminated in this passion project that is the Crypt Folk romances, and especially Reasons Found in Promises.
Yeah, like you have a very diverse set of inspiration. Um, I was typing something. Yeah, I agree. That is fascinating. Your book is published. Where can people that want to follow along find your book?
Sure. So I have a website at www.artiranthfields.com. So there you can buy the paperback directly, or you can go on Amazon and you can buy the paperback there. You can buy the ebook there as well, and it will be available on Kindle Unlimited until the 29th of this month, but it will actually be taken off of there at that point to go wide, and then it'll be available on a bunch of platforms like Kobo, Quibble, Apple Books, and stuff like that. But you can just go to my website, and that would be the kind of the quickest link to find everything. So.
All right. Well, anybody who wants to follow along now you know how you can. And with that, that concludes our Gemcast today.